Merci, mes amis. Thank you. Premier Wynne, it's so good to see you here this morning. We spent a lot of time together last spring, and I look forward to spending some good time with you next year as well. Dear friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, merci de me donner cette tribune. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui et demain pour débattre des grands enjeux auxquels nous faisons face en tant que pays. En réfléchissant à mon allocution aujourd'hui, je me suis posé la question que Canada 2020 nous pose dans le cadre de cette conférence. Dans quel genre de pays voulons-nous vivre en 2020? Pour ma part, j'espère que ce sera un pays qui aura redécouvert la voie du progrès. J'espère que ce sera un pays qui aura renoué avec la promesse de laisser un meilleur pays à nos enfants que celui dont nous avons hérité de nos parents. En somme, j'aimerais que le Canada en 2020 soit le précurseur d'un Canada encore meilleur en 2030. We're a few years away still from 2020, but each challenge we face now is a chance to work toward that future Canada. And as we do, we should consider our actions in a future tense. How will we stay true to our country's character? How will we live up to our own high standards? How will we make judgments today with that future in mind? La question sur laquelle nous sommes appelés à nous prononcer ces jours-ci est la suivante. Quel est notre rôle sur la scène internationale? Et comment pouvons-nous utiliser notre influence de manière positive et constructive? Before us is a question of the most serious and consequential kind about how Canada ought to act in the world. More to the point, how can Canada deploy its resources and resourcefulness in a world of ongoing and complex threats? How do we ensure our own security and help build peace for people in the world's most embattled places? This is what we face with ISIL. It is a threat to regional and global security and to millions of innocent people in an already war-ravaged part of the world. You know, as well as I do, that ISIL's acts are horrific. They are designed to be. ISIL murders ethnic and religious minorities across Iraq. They murder innocent civilians, humanitarian workers, and journalists. These awful acts have been fully documented, often by the perpetrators themselves. This humanitarian crisis and security threat needs to be dealt with. But when we ask ourselves what Canada should do about it, a lot of tough questions arise. Il y a 10 ans, les pays alliés ont dû prendre leurs propres décisions sur une intervention militaire en Irak. Le gouvernement, dirigé par Jean Chrétien, a pris la sage décision de ne pas commettre les forces armées canadiennes dans cette aventure. Mais le premier ministre actuel, M. Harper, était de ceux qui pensaient que le Canada devait s'engager dans cette guerre. Notre décision de ne pas aller en guerre était la bonne. The 2003 Iraq War was waged on false pretenses and flawed intelligence. It was a mission that destabilized the region, sowed further conflict, cost our allies $3 trillion, and cost thousands of people their lives. The world is still dealing with the consequences of that mistake. And let us never forget how that mission was sold to the public. With overheated, moralistic rhetoric that obscured very real flaws in the strategy and the plan to implement it. I thought about this the other day in Parliament when Mr. Harper called the current military campaign in Iraq a noble effort. Back in 2003, He called President Bush's Iraq war a matter of freedom, democracy, and civilization itself. Alors nous comprenons très bien pourquoi les Canadiens ont beaucoup de doutes et de questions par rapport à la situation actuelle. Ils méritent des réponses claires, honnêtes, factuelles, clear answers, honest answers, complete answers. We know the Iraq fiasco haunts the choices we have to make today, but we cannot make the wrong decision now because the wrong decision was made then. Malheureusement, nous ne disposons pas de tous les faits en ce moment. Et M. Harper n'a montré aucune volonté de nous les fournir. Le gouvernement conservateur a commis l'armée canadienne pour une mission d'appui de 30 jours. Liberals supported that non-combat mission in good faith. And how was that faith rewarded? They won't reveal the goals of that mission. They won't reveal how that mission might end. They were not upfront about exactly how many members of our forces are part of that mission. They wouldn't even give us a start date, let alone an end date. That last bit of information did come eventually, but by that time, Canadian forces were already involved. Canadians still don't know what those advisors, members of our forces, have been doing all this time, or what sort of risks they may be facing. That 30-day mission is almost up. Alors, où en sommes-nous aujourd'hui? Le Premier ministre a déclaré qu'il serait prêt à ce que le Canada joue un plus grand rôle dans la mission actuelle. Il a dit que les États-Unis avaient demandé pour un appui additionnel et qu'il considérait leur demande. Mais il n'a partagé aucune information avec le Parlement. Et il n'a partagé aucune information avec les Canadiens. How did Mr. Harper let Canadians know that he was thinking about sending their fellow citizens into war? He announced it casually in New York during an interview with the Wall Street Journal at Goldman Sachs. And as we later learned through the U.S. State Department, Mr. Harper's description of events was only loosely related to the truth. He had been the one to offer help first. Instead of being honest and upfront with Canadians, he dissembled. Instead of being open and transparent, Mr. Harper gave his own version of events, one that helped him make his argument. He remains secretive and with a purpose. Unlike prime ministers for decades before him, Mr. Harper has made no effort to build a non-partisan case for war. Instead, he dares us to oppose his war, staking out not moral territory, but political territory. As a consequence, all our critical questions go unanswered. We don't know exactly what he has offered the Americans. We don't know what our role might look like. We don't know how long our contribution is expected to last. We don't know how helpful our CF-18s will truly be. In place of these facts, we get rhetoric about the nobility of combat. We can understand why Canadians are anxious about this. What we do know is this. It has been more than a week since Mr. Harper said he might shift Canada's contribution in the fight against ISIL from a non-combat to a combat role. It has been more than a week since he said we could be sending Canadian forces into war, which means it is now more than a week since he set us on a path to doing something we can't and he won't define. This is troubling, my friends. On this issue of all issues, in that place, of all places. Canada has asked a lot of our men and women in uniform over the past decade. And too often, they have returned home only to be let down. If we dare ask more of them now, there ought to be a good reason. Nous avons dit depuis le début qu'un changement d'orientation dans la mission devrait faire l'objet d'un débat aux communes. M. Harper veut aller en guerre. Il doit nous dire pourquoi. C'est à lui que revient le fardeau de la preuve. Mr. Harper is intent on taking Canada to war in Iraq. He needs to justify that. He has not made the case for it. He hasn't even tried. In the time since Mr. Harper raised this idea of an extended Canadian mission in Iraq on Wall Street, our ally, UK Prime Minister David Cameron, reached across partisan lines and held a full and informed parliamentary debate. It's quite the contrast. Now, we are told a debate is finally coming to our own House of Commons. Well, here are the core principles Liberals will take to that debate. 1, that Canada does have a role to play to confront humanitarian crises and security threats around the world. 2, that when a government considers deploying our men and women in uniform, there must be a clear mission overall and a clear role for Canada within that mission. 3, that the case for deploying our forces must be made openly and transparently, based on clear and reliable, dispassionately presented facts. And 4, that Canada's role must reflect the broad scope of Canada's capabilities and how best we can help. It comes down to this. Canadians expect the highest standard of openness and honesty from a leader who wants to send our forces to war. Prime Minister Harper has so far failed to meet that standard. Un premier ministre qui veut envoyer nos soldats en guerre doit rencontrer les plus hauts standards d'honnêteté et d'ouverture. Jusqu'à présent, M. Harper a failli lamentablement. Ce que M. Harper aimerait, c'est que les Canadiens croient que la seule contribution possible du Canada est d'envoyer des avions de chasse en Irak. Here's the thing. Prime Minister Harper would have you believe that Canada's best contribution to this effort is a handful of aging warplanes. I think Canadians have a lot more in them than that. We can be resourceful, and there are significant, substantial, non-combat roles that Canada can play. Le Canada peut jouer un rôle significatif en Irak, même s'il refuse de se lancer dans une mission de combat. And some, we can play better than many, or perhaps any, of our allies, whether they are strategic airlift, training, or medical support. We have the capabilities to meaningfully assist in a non-combat role to a well-defined international mission. And we should also answer the call from our allies to provide more help to a well-funded and well-planned humanitarian aid effort. Our Canadian values and principles are reflected in our commitment to the responsibility to protect. And while that does not require us to take a combat role, it does compel us to help. Le Canada a une longue et fière tradition de venir en aide à ceux qui en ont besoin à travers le monde. Nous l'avons fait souvent et nous pouvons le faire encore. Notre gouvernement a la capacité et les moyens d'offrir une aide au développement beaucoup plus généreuse aux Irakiens. Nos alliés dans la région, la Turquie et la Jordanie, ont été aux premières lignes de la crise des réfugiés. Ils ont besoin d'aide. Ils ne seront pas en mesure de garder seuls ce niveau d'engagement et de responsabilité encore longtemps. Il nous appartient de les appuyer dans cette crise humanitaire d'une ampleur gigantesque. Political reform needs to occur in Iraq. It needs informed partners to help build these institutions. This is something we do well. The country needs an inclusive government that speaks for and represents all Iraqi men and women. Iraq needs a government that is fair-minded and which respects the many ethnic minorities within its borders. Canada has that expertise. In the end, this all comes down to leadership. Who do we want to be? What are our values? What are our interests, and how do we wish to pursue those interests in the world? In this case, it is about the Prime Minister's sacred responsibility to be honest and truthful with people, especially about matters of life and death. At the end of every decision to enter combat is a brave Canadian in harm's way. We owe them clarity. We owe them a plan. Most of all, we owe them the truth. Mr. Harper has offered none of these. There is another question Canada 2020 puts to us. It's right there on the webpage. Where do we want Canada to be on the world stage? I think the answer to that one is actually quite easy. We do not want a Canada that only believes itself to be a leader, while in reality, it merely follows along in global affairs. C'est une chose de se dire un leader dans le monde, c'est une toute autre chose de le démontrer en passant de la parole aux actes. Dire que le Canada est bon ne suffit pas. Il faut le démontrer avec des gestes concrets. Canada should be a true leader, one that has earned its place at the front of the pack, based on the role we play internationally and on our commitment to uphold human rights and security. A Canada that stays true to its founding values and that will be an example to the world. Together, we can build that Canada. Merci beaucoup.